Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this last session. Very wonderful to have John with us. Important part of the studies at RYI to have these scholar practitioners visit us and share their understanding. So welcome, Shireen. If any of you are so inspired, we encourage you to make a donation. Daniel will share the link on the online Zoom link. And we will have also, if you're interested, on the RII page, you can find also a donation link. So welcome for that. And I will not introduce our guest tonight and just enjoy his presence.
Well, welcome back, everybody. So last night, our first night, I introduced some things about the concept of a field of care or a field of refuge, and I introduced the meditation called field of care in the receptive mode, which is really adapted from devotional practices of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist traditions, Mahayana and Vajrayana. I think I may have mentioned a lot of the West, as they've been importing practices from Buddhism, Westerners and Western scientists and others who adapted those practices had kind of an allergy to devotional practices. I don't think they understood them. I don't think they ever asked what's their function. Maybe devotional practices have an extremely important function in the history of Buddhist traditions, as in other traditions. But I don't think that question was, for the most part, ever asked. Instead, devotional practices were just dropped. And people were taking up something called mindfulness without any sense of deep connection to those who have practiced mindfulness before them. And shamatha, vipassana, things like that. I don't mean to be overly critical. Some wonderful, wonderful things have come from that. Enormous things, actually. It's just that it seems like historically it's time now to raise that further side of Buddhist practice, the devotional practice side, and not only theorize about it, but really attempt in our own experience to demonstrate its power to help inform and empower all other practices, especially including those of love and compassion and wisdom. So the first night I really kind of introduced all that, and then we went a little deeper into the field of care meditation, noticing the reactions that came up when we enter into the field of care meditation. We're allowing our field of care or field of refuge, which is drawn out of our own experience and is connecting for us, that draws out qualities from our underlying awareness or deeper nature, to help us become a kind of a loving, healing environment for all of our feelings. And perhaps surprising to some of us, that actually generates reactions in the mind, reactions of just wanting to be distracted from it and not staying with it, or reactions of feeling like inadequate, or I don't deserve this, or reactions like I don't believe any of this, or reactions like I should be only taking care of others. It's wrong for me to be experiencing so much love, things like that. Many of us shared reactions. And so we learned how to take all of those reactions as they arise into the practice itself, which is critical to the practice. So as any reaction arises, remember, we having accessed qualities from our underlying nature with the help of the field of care, accessing, that's the first principle of the field of care meditation. Then when any kind of reaction comes up, a sense of self and its thoughts and feelings and reactions, then we first notice it. It's basic mindfulness. Notice, second principle. Include it. Let it include itself in this field of absolute warmth, deep acceptance, deep allowing. And then our mind is no longer identified with it. Not by trying not to identify with it. We don't have to try. Just by being a healing environment for that feeling and reaction. So simple. I've already heard from people that that's been coming up in their days. That some of their ordinary reactions have changed because they started doing this. So the reaction or the pattern of thought and feeling that is there, because the mind's not identifying with it, we're a healing environment for it, not caught up in it. All it can do is begin to process itself, metabolize itself, unwind. Not by trying to get it to, but by allowing it to. And that brought us to the third session, and that we went into the letting be practice, letting be further into the source of the loving qualities that we were accessing in the field of care. And then last night we entered into the inclusive mode meditation, which is extending love to others, that begins with the field of care. And in this, the love and compassion that's coming from our Buddha nature, that was evoked by our field of care, which holds all parts of us with warmth and care, can also hold all other beings as if they were parts of our larger self, as Shantideva taught in chapter 8. And this means that we do not have to struggle to send love to others. Love is always available in the open space of our being, as Tenzin Wangyal said. Love is always available in the open space of our being. We don't have to struggle to open to love and let others be included in it. We can just let many others be naturally included in the same loving environment that our field of care evoked for us. And we let that then help us commune with those others, sense them from our depth into their depth, below the level of superficial judgments and reactions that we've all been living on, and to wish them deeply well and free. The basic wish of love. So in this way, we start to access a vast capacity of openness and warmth and compassion from our Buddha nature, which actually helps us resonate with others in their Buddha nature, with warmth for them in the depth of their being. And from that place of deepening communion, we can also sense how all of us have been so long largely lost from that depth of our being, how we've all been lost together from that depth, from our Buddha nature. Caught up in reactive, struggling parts of ourselves, all of us, and endlessly reacting to each other from that. Not knowing each other, and not knowing ourselves either. And that evokes a further sense of compassion for all. And that's what we did last night. And that's what we're going to go into a little more fully tonight, the inclusive mode. So this practice is intuitive. We're learning to commune with others at a pre-verbal level, a level of depth that's below the whole field of socially conditioned judgments and reactions. A level of depth that's below the entire field of socially conditioned judgments and reactions. Socially conditioned judgments will still occur, but we're not living there. We're living more at a depth level while doing the inclusive practice. It's like instead of living at the level of choppy waves on the ocean, endlessly struggling, we just settle into the depth. It's peace. And we can sense from there the depth of the water. That's the ground of all the waves, the source of all the waves. So, so in this practice too, we're experiencing ourselves as an extension of the field of care in which we were held. We learn to hold as we are held, to love as we are loved, and to know as we are known. And that's why so commonly in Tibetan Buddhist practice, the bodhicitta prayer is said immediately after the refuge prayer. Held in refuge, held in all the qualities, awakening qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, held in the power of the Dharma, then we become an extension of that great holding and hold others as an extension of it. To love as we are loved. That's how the entire thing works. Not an autonomous, separate sense of self desperately trying to get enlightened, whatever that would mean. And yet that is the pattern of thought all fall into for much of our career in the Dharma, because we are so socially conditioned to fall into that. So that's partly my mission, is to really cut through that, cut through the way we've been socially conditioned to think that it's me trying desperately to practice hard, as if on my own, as if I haven't already been held in a field of absolute love and compassion, which has been resonating with my capacity for love and compassion and wisdom, and empowering me to actualize it all along, as if that wasn't happening. But it is. So to cut through. Is that okay? You kind of following? So again, we're going to begin the inclusive mode meditation with a brief field of care practice, and then we'll let its healing environment, which embraces all parts of ourself, become a healing environment for many others. And we let that help us commune with them, to sense them beyond superficial judgments, to resonate with them more in the depth of their being, in their deep dignity and capacity, and while also sensing them compassionately in their hidden layers of suffering and wishing them deeply well. So we're going to, as last night, we'll start with one person or being that you just naturally like to include in this loving, healing environment that's holding all parts of you and your world. And then include more and more others. Now, it's really important, just before I lead the meditation, to remember this one key instruction. It's absolutely critical. If a part of your mind comes up that's having trouble with this, some sense of self and reaction, I can't do this, I'm tired of this, whatever, any kind of reaction comes up in the mind like that that's drawing your attention away from the meditation, just settle back into your field of care, or refresh it, recall it freshly, and re-inhabit it. And reunite with its loving environment. And let that part of you that just came up be embraced in its warmth and acceptance. And then when it settles, you can return to the extending love, inclusive practice. Okay? That's really critical. Did you follow that last instruction? You heard it? When part of your mind comes up that just wants to go away from the practice, and you probably will, notice it, reunite with the healing environment, your field of care, and just embrace that part of you. Just profoundly, deeply allowing with warmth, letting it have all the space it needs to find its own place in its own time. And when it does, then again, you can return to the inclusive mode, okay? You have to know that skill. That's what we're learning now. Once we've learned that, We're set to go for life. So be ready now. Early stage of this, we'll need to recall our field of care, a caring moment, a benefactor, your spiritual field, your yidam, your lama, the communion of saints, your favorite prophet, whatever it is for you, the natural world. Be ready to bring to mind your field of care, the one that really connects for you. So when you bring it to mind and re-inhabit it, you actually begin to access these loving qualities. And if you lose the sense of those qualities in the meditation, then just freshly recall and re-inhabit your field of care again. Just begin again. Okay? Okay, here we go. You can just follow along, relax into it. So just settling in, relaxed, back straight. Eyes can be gazing gently downward if you like. And let's just come down from the thinking mind into the body. Just feeling the body as a whole. Letting the gravity of the body help the mind settle into it. Let the breath flow naturally while breathing from the abdomen, so it expands with each breath. And feel the abdomen expand and contract with each breath. Settling into that feeling. And let that feeling of the belly moving with the breath just draw you into that feeling more and more, breath by breath. Just letting that feeling draw you into it more and more. And now bring to mind your field of care as present here with you now, not just a memory, present now. So you are being seen and held in deep care, compassion, and acceptance and warmth beyond judgments. Just try to feel and believe that that's happening. You are being seen and held in deep care, compassion, total acceptance and warmth beyond judgments. And just relax into the feeling of that experience, steeping in its loving energies and tender qualities, and letting them infuse your whole being and your whole mind and world. Just relaxing into it. These loving energies and qualities permeating your whole body and heart, mind and world. Or imagine that's happening. Every part of you loved in its very being. Every part of you loved in its very being. If you wish, you can also become aware of inner layers of stress and struggle or suffering within you, and let them all just be embraced in this loving, healing environment. Every layer of stress and struggle, all embraced in this loving environment. And let whatever thoughts and feelings arise just process themselves within this loving, healing backdrop in their own time by letting them all be. And now think of someone dear to you that you'd just naturally like to include in this same loving environment, and let them also be included. And let this help you commune or resonate with them in the depth of their being, their deep dignity and hidden layers of struggle, and to wish them deeply well and free. Wishing them deeply well and free. Now you can bring to mind a few more beings that you'd also like to include in this environment of loving energies and warmth, and let them be included along with that first being. Communing with them also in the depth of their being, hidden layers of stress and struggle, and wishing them deeply well and free. You can let the practice expand to include larger circles of beings that come to mind, including them all in this field of loving energies and compassion and warmth, sensing them all in their depth and hidden struggles, wishing them deeply well and free. And finally, you can let the vast underlying capacity of warmth and compassion from your basic awareness just expand much more fully to include all beings, human, animal, all creatures, or imagine this is happening. And let this help you commune with them all in the depths of their being, their hidden sufferings, while wishing them all deeply well and free. And finally, you can let this pervasive environment of warmth just help your mind to relax and just release all of its frameworks of meditation and concern. Release all agendas, all attempts to do anything, all goals. And let the mind just settle back a bit inwardly and relax into the background of its awareness, which is naturally wide open and luminous like a sunlit sky. Just relaxing into the background of awareness or the ground of experience. That's naturally wide open and radiant like a sunlit sky. And let that sky-like openness and lucidity meditate you. And as thoughts and feelings arise, you can just let them metabolize themselves within this sky-like openness of awareness by just letting everything be. Okay, good. So a couple of things I just want to point out about this um, practice before we open it for questions and comments. These really work. First is thoroughness. In the early phase of this meditation, the receptive phase with the field of care, we're becoming a healing environment for all of our own thoughts and feelings and reactions. That receptive mode of practice, the first part of the meditation. Remember that? Brought our field of care to mind. In that part, we're accepting these loving energies and qualities of the field of care into every aspect of our being. We're becoming a kind of a loving environment. It's kind of infusing us. And then when extending those loving energies and qualities to others or including them in it, we imagine that they permeate the entire being of others. So we may never have consciously actually accepted and extended love in such a thoroughgoing way. That's the first point. Love being the deep wish for beings to be well and free. Secondly, all-inclusiveness. Also notice how vast the scope of love becomes in the final stage of extending it or including others in it, literally encompassing all beings, or imagining that's happening. So part of the power of this practice comes from its all-pervasive scope, which is actually beyond the comprehension of our ego-centered frames of mind. In such a literally boundless inclusiveness, or literally a literal all-inclusiveness, helps harmonize us with the infinite openness and unlimited compassionate capacity of the mind's deep nature. It's Buddha nature. So the practice helps conform us to the infinite scope of the nature of mind from which the loving qualities are coming. The meditation helps us start to allow the all-inclusive power of our Buddha nature to extend itself. We may not feel all this initially very much, but even just imagining that all beings are included is helping to harmonize us with the all-encompassing power of love and compassion that's available in the depth of our awareness. It actually is all that pervasive, that power of pervading all. It's because the nature of mind already pervades all in its luminous empty nature. And then again, as I've mentioned, from this place of deepening communion with beings, we can sense how all of us have been largely lost from that depth and that profound inclusiveness and that profound thoroughness of love and compassion, lost from our Buddha nature, caught up in reactive, struggling parts of ourselves, and from them endlessly reacting to others who are caught up in their similar struggling parts of their mind, samsara. And that can evoke a further sense of compassion for all. When we're connecting more and more in the experience of feeling, at least for those moments that we're really connecting to the practice, we may not have that experience all the time by any means, but there may be moments when it feels like, oh, this is really starting to connect. When it's starting to connect, that's also a moment of compassion for how disconnected we have been. In the moment of connection, we can recognize how disconnected we've been. And that's the recognition of how disconnected all of us have been here together. And that's compassion. That's kind of like a great sadness of the suffering of samsara. It's been so largely unconscious to us, and that we've all been imprisoned by together. That compassion is kind of a great power for awakening. So there's also a kind of joy in it, a sadness and a joy together. Yeah. Joyful sadness. Because it means if we keep progressing, we can do something about it. We actually can begin more and more to awaken our capacity, since we've had so much help, since we've been held so profoundly by the awakened capacities of others. We can begin to sense that we can actually learn how to join them. And then we can be part of the solution to samsara with them, who are holding all of us. Long before we realized that was happening, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Turned out that was what my dissertation was about. At the time, I thought it was about a lot of technical details. It's coalesced after the last few decades. Buddhahood. I'll give you an example of what I mean about operating at a more superficial level of consciousness, like we all tend to do most of the time. Like endlessly just reacting to our own images of each other as if our images of each other were each other. This is where it's so nice to study Yogacara philosophy. So Bill Waldron here is a real expert in it. That's the solution, is Yogacara philosophy. I'm really drawing from it heavily here. I hope Bill's noticing that. We're almost continually mistaking our own limited, distorted images of each other for each other. Not noticing we're doing that. So we're never actually knowing anybody. You can say, I've known my spouse for 40 years, There's a good chance that a lot of that is knowing our own habitual thoughts of her or him, not her or him. That's basically vichara. So that's a superficial level of consciousness that we've all been conditioned to live in. But these practices, and of course, other such practices, these are really derived from practices of fundamental Mahayana practices of love, compassion, wisdom, Ngundro, Vajrayana, etc. So it's the curriculum here. These practices can help us to settle into more of a depth dimension of our being, access qualities of our deeper nature, nature of mind, Buddha nature, even begin to reunify with it, at least a bit. And that's what I'm calling a kind of a depth level of our being. And from there, we can sense others in their depth, their enormous capacity, their great dignity. They're utterly transcending all these limited labels I had for them. They're totally beyond who I thought they were-ness. That's more of a depth of our being. And from there, interacting with others, relating to the depth of their being, not just to their heads, but to their hearts, from our heart. And that's how our teachers have related to us. That's what they're doing, I think. I'll tell you a little story. This is a true story. It's told to me by a couple of friends who were traveling in Manhattan and New York City. There are a lot of taxi cabs in New York City. So they hailed a cab. It's driven by a Haitian immigrant. And this Haitian cab driver told them this story, said this had happened to him. Somehow they got to talking. My friend's a theologian, so I don't know, maybe that triggered certain kinds of conversation. So the cab driver said, this really happened. I was just driving along and I was looking for the address and I didn't notice that there was a stop sign. And I was driving slowly, but I ended up running through the stop sign. I didn't stop. And suddenly I noticed a man on the curb walking hurriedly toward me, waving his fist, red in the face, and screaming and yelling at me that that you should stop. You did not stop. An enraged man. Okay, so far? So the cab driver stopped and he rolled down his window. And the enraged man came up to his window, red in the face, still hurling epithets at him, curse words. The cab driver looked at him and said, I'm sorry. You're right. I should have stopped. And the man was stunned. He stopped. He couldn't speak for a moment. And then he said, when he found words, I take it all back. I take back all my words. You understand? So the enraged man's reductive, angry image of the cab driver could no longer function. It just could not function. His rage could not function anymore because the cab driver was not speaking to the man's reactive self. He was speaking to the man's fuller, deeper self. He was speaking from his heart, right to the heart of the enraged man, not to his head. So the man's mind could not remain identified with his angry self. So his angry sense of self just could not continue functioning. It had been disrupted. And his reductive perception of the cab driver just could not continue. And that was a moment of revelation for that formerly angry man, of a profound human being before him. And he responded with reverence, I take it all back. You follow? The cab driver was speaking more from the depth of his being, from his heart, to the depth of that man's being. And that disrupted the man's turmoil. Couldn't function anymore. One other thing I want to point out about the practice, just an illustration of what I mean by coming from the depth of our being and relating to others more in their depth, not just to their head. Another thing I want to point out is what's being raised up by the practices we've done last night and tonight, this inclusive mode, which includes the field of care and the letting be aspect also. They're all in it. And you'll see it in the meditation handout you all have when you're registered. It's meditation number 6, inclusive mode. That is the power of love and compassion in these receptive and inclusive mode meditations, field of care and extending love. At the releasing phase of those meditations, including the one we last did, where you just sort of settle back, let go of all your frames of reference, frames of mind, and just settle back into more of the ground or background of awareness, which is naturally wide open. Just settle back toward the mind's nature a little bit. So at that releasing phase, that helps the mind to settle into the source of the love, or begin to. That's the openness and clarity and warmth in the depth of our awareness, which is our innate wisdom. And as the mind settles into the wisdom of utter openness in its deep nature, to whatever degree it does, which is an unimpeded openness beyond confinement, then its capacity of love is freed to unfold much more inclusively and unconditionally. And that becomes a synergy. The more that the energies and powers of love and compassion are freed up to come forth, the more they empower the mind and help it to trust enough, trusting those qualities that are coming from the nature of our mind, our Buddha nature, helping the mind then to relax into that nature. And the more the mind relaxes into that nature, or toward it, which is an unimpeded utter openness or basic space, that's a space in which the capacities of love and compassion can unfold much more freely again. So that's a synergy, literal synergy, mutually empowering. Love, compassion, and wisdom. And those are the 2 wings of the Bodhisattva path. One other last point, and then I want to open it up for questions. Sorry, just coughed into the mic. That's a no-no for speakers. Authentic love and compassion is not just a yes to everyone's ways of thinking and ways of behaving. It's not just a silly smiling. It's not just a, yeah, whatever you want to do, I'm loving and compassionate, so I'll just let you do it. That is not love and compassion. That's sort of stupidity, but authentic love and compassion both confirms something in beings and is also confronting something in beings, always. It's both confirming and confronting. So this practice of learning to become an inclusive environment of love and compassion does not involve accepting anyone's harmful thoughts and actions, but it puts us in touch with their fuller depth of humanity, of dignity, of capacity. And by learning to recognize and connect to that capacity in them, then we can challenge people's harmful ways of thinking and acting, not just on behalf of others that they're harming, which is mainly what's happening in the world. We think we're defending some against others. We think that's what challenge and confrontation is, but that's again not knowing anyone. If we think we're defending some against others, and that's how they exist and that's all they are, we're lost. Rather, when in our practice, we're actually learning to come from the depth of our being and recognize and relate to others in the depth of their being, which is a practice, a learning. But if we're actually learning that, if we're actually beginning to do that, then we can challenge people's harmful ways of thinking and acting as we perceive it on behalf of them, on behalf of their capacity, on behalf of their depth, on behalf of their humanity, not just on behalf of others, but for them, like the cab driver confronted the enraged man with love that was wise love, speaking from his depth into the depth of the other man, was confirming the depth in the other man, confirming by confronting his superficial reactions. So authentic love and compassion both confirm something in other beings, and it's also always confronting something in them, confirming their capacity for deep goodness and confronting everything that impedes that capacity in them, both simultaneously. And by confirming the one, that's already confronting the other. You ever notice when you're around like a really powerfully profound person, like a High Lama or something, you feel a little nervous? You ever notice that? Because their very being is both powerfully confirming the depth of your being, because that's where they're living. And by powerfully confirming the depth of your being, your deep capacity and dignity, they are confronting your ways of thinking. They're confronting where we are used to living, which is not deep. Simultaneously, by confirming your depth, they are confronting your superficiality. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about, I caught on to this as, oh, that's what they're doing to me. That's why they make me nervous. Talking about myself. But I've known an awful lot of Western Buddhists and over the past 25 years. So I think it's true of others too. So authentic love and compassion is always both confirming and confronting. It is never just doing one without the other, always. That's why authentic love and compassion actually make us a little nervous. Think about it and think back through your life. When I think of people who are really present to me, like really present, made me a little nervous. But I also love the fact that they were so present to me. Seems like a paradox, but turns out it's not really a paradox. They were confirming me and confronting me. Like that seventh grade Latin teacher I had, I talked about last night, remember? I was really enraged at another boy in the Latin class, and I did like a running, flying tackle and tackled him in the middle of the class. Desks were falling to the side. People were trying to get out of the way. The Latin teacher couldn't believe this was happening, and I started pummeling the kid. He was 13 years old. Remember I told that story? And then the Latin teacher sort of took me out of the classroom, got me to a private place, and just sort of looked me right in the eyes. And just his look was confirming, deeply confirming, you are more than this, and confronting, you are more than this. Confirming, you are more, confronting than this. You follow? Really profound. my Catholic Latin teacher. He'd been persecuted too during his upbringing, his background. So he understood what I was going through. Just one final thought, so I don't forget to say it. If some people have said that they really felt deeply connected to what I was sharing this week, which is great. I mean, it's helpful input for me. I appreciate knowing that. And if you feel really deeply connected to what I shared, this is what I always say at the end of every retreat or course like this. It's a real experiential course. If you really feel connected to this, you probably also have a connection to one or more of my own spiritual teachers or close spiritual friends, such as Chugni Rinpoche, Tsogni Rinpoche, Paktruk Rinpoche, or Mingyur Rinpoche. So you might consider exploring that as well if you haven't yet. Okay, so we have time. So any questions? Again, questions that are not just coming out from left field, theoretical about things you've thought about before you ever came to this class, but not just that, but questions and also comments that are coming from your experience of the meditations that we've done this week, or the one we did tonight, and also any parts of the talks that I've given to frame the meditations, okay? So we're focused on experiential learning. Okay. Do you want to start online? Okay.
So first question, how should we deal with afflictive doubt that raises the idea this is all very nice and skillful, but we just imagining these assumptions and repeating them as if they are true. I'm finding this practice helpful, but maybe my ingrained ideas are preventing me from accepting fully this practice.
So for that person, that's part of the reason I gave the option of a caring moment, because a caring moment is real. And please don't tell me you have not had any caring moments. You have had thousands of caring moments. I was giving examples of that over the last few days. I won't go through all that again. It's true, we have not been educated, and even in mindfulness teaching, for the most part, we have not been taught to be mindful of moments. You know, even dozens and dozens and hundreds of little moments that I've experienced since I came to Nepal, just this week. Just a moment when I was, these motorcycle drivers are practically ready to kill you. And then at one point, there I am facing a motorcycle driver. Sort of that happens sometimes. I'm right in front of him. And he just sort of like gestures just like a kind gesture, like I am sort of giving way to you, like that. That's a caring moment. Start noticing them. And then you cannot deny they're not real. They're not just made up in our heads. And they carry a real power. And try just really trying on for a moment the fact that you're already experiencing their power, and that's real, because you just said so. I'm finding them helpful. So find a few caring moments that genuinely make you happy to recall and that you found uplifting or inspiring, and really explore re-inhabiting one of those caring moments. And then just really explore letting yourself just experience the qualities of it. Now, having said all that, comes the instruction that we've already had. Now your habit of thought will come up, but none of this is real. I mean, we're just supposed to believe something. Well, now, first of all, you can recognize that that thought is not true. This is real. Secondly, um, take it into the practice in exactly the way it was instructed. You'll find it on your meditation handout. Meditations number 2 or 6 are probably what we're talking about. That is, you've accessed these qualities, you're experiencing them, as you've said. Accessing, that's the first principle. What's the second principle? Anybody? Accessing, noticing. When the thought comes up, oh, but none of this is real, none of this is real, I'm just sort of being brainwashed. Whatever thought comes up, no one ever really cared about me, there was no caring moment. Of course there was, because you're in it. Whatever the thought is, notice it. It's basic mindfulness. And then include it. That's the third principle. Let it just be included in this environment of warmth, love, healing power for it. Learn to be a friend of it rather than just being sucked into identity with it. So that part of your mind will only continue to suffer because you don't know how to befriend it. And you will only continue to suffer because you don't know how to befriend it. In other words, follow the instruction. Come back to that. Look at it again. Study it in the handout and do it. That'll start to address your question. Okay.
Great. So it's already included in the instructions, yeah?
Yeah, it is, but he needed to have it pointed out that the caring moment may be his best option. Okay.
Thank you. So second question, through the study of dependent origination used to establish emptiness of all phenomena and the non-dual wisdom, leading to natural arising of great compassion. Could you advise on this, please? Thank you.
I'd rather not. Because that is the curricular approach for the most part in all these learning centers. And it has great power and it's wonderful, but you have your Kempos are all teaching that. The other Western philosophy scholars who come are all teaching that. Reasonings of dependent arising, investigations into dependent arising, they're all doing that. Like 90% of everything written on Buddhism is doing that. So I wanted to come at things from the other side, which is things are already empty. We don't have to get to emptiness. We can let it draw us in. The empty, lucid nature of reality, we can let it, like a magnet, draw us in or help us to relax into it. This nature of things, it's already here. I preferred this week, maybe a little different from most of the other teachings, but not entirely, because it's related to certain parts of Kagyu and Nyingma tradition that affirm that, actually the fundamental nature of phenomena, dharmata, it already is the nature of phenomena. I mean, if our filters on reality if we were able to just relax them enough, reality could disclose itself. And that might be a very powerful thing to allow reality to do. And that's actually what we've been doing here this week. So that's where I'd rather like to keep it for now. And you can go back to reasonings around dependent arising, starting in the head, in most of the rest of your curriculum. But here we kind of started with the heart. and more of an intuitive sense that maybe we're already held from the ground of our being by all the powers and qualities of awakening already. And that's already a kind of a pointing to or signaling that the nature of reality itself is already here. And that's why we can be held from the ground of our reality by love, compassion, and wisdom already. Okay, next question.
Thank you. It's similar. So
Oh, maybe we can go to another question here then. Something,
yeah,
if it's similar enough.
I'll read it and then you can see.
Okay.
Pratitya Samutpada, after seeing how consciousness and name and form are mutually dependent, and how each ceases with the ceasing of the other,
Yeah.
scripture, study, or meditation which leads to this goal. Faster? Does it go faster?
The speed with which we reach the so-called goal depends entirely on our conditioning and our inner obstacles, not on any curriculum. There was one other little thing there. Oh, yeah. Dependent arising and causality work, and impermanence functions because everything is already empty, which provides the space for it all to function. Okay. Maybe other questions and comments from here in the room? Yeah.
Thanks again for doing this.
I think you have to hold the mic closer.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was intrigued by something you said at the beginning tonight about the aversion that many seem to have in sort of Western transplantations of Buddhism towards devotional practice and sort of reverence for lineage. And I sometimes feel some of that pull in myself too. And I was curious where you think that comes from, given that many of the other spiritual traditions that are predominant in the West actually have a lot of devotion and even, worship that are part of them.
Well, Buddhism does too. It has just as much actually, but it's been edited out in large part in the first few waves of Buddhism coming to the West or to the modern world, really. People made a decision early on as they were importing practices from Buddhism to edit out, to remove mention of devotional practice for Westerners or modern urban people taking up practices drawn from Buddhism. Buddhism itself has a much devotional practice, as you can. Here we are immersed in it. What are we hearing in the background? The reason I think they edited it out was for good intentions, and it probably served its function. It allowed practices to come into our world where devotional practices are not understood and not appreciated at all, at least in the secular parts of our modern world. And the reason why so many of us have been socially conditioned to not appreciate devotional practices, has to do with the whole history of Western cultures, especially like with what's called the Western Enlightenment, which was the raising up of reason over emotion and faith as the sole arbiter of truth. So reason, which is conceptual, became the only arbiter of truth. So there was no such thing as non-conceptual knowing, and other forms of knowing, including affective knowing and so forth, were considered unimportant. And that streamed into the whole history of the development of our civilizations in the modern world. We inherited that. Fundamentalist movements of various religions have rejected that And then other people who are not fundamentalists tended to adhere to it. So modern Protestantism largely rejected much of the so-called trappings of Catholicism, much of it is deeply devotional culture. So as other scholars have written, we've all been Protestantized in that sense, more than we're conscious. Is that what you're describing is not just you a little bit doubtful about devotional practices. It's so many of us have been conditioned that way, as I'm sure you have, and it's not just a little bit. And it's completely understandable. And as I said, it may have functioned to edit out devotional practice in the initial stage. Maybe that's what was necessary for practices from Buddhism to be acceptable enough for people to begin to explore them seriously. So I think we're just at a different historical phase. So I'm, with the help of others, that's part of my mission, is to actually reintroduce them. As I said at the beginning, I didn't hear of anybody. I've read about it a little bit. I don't see any evidence of anybody raising the question of what the functions of devotional practices were. I mean, scientists are supposed to ask questions like that. They weren't very good scientists, none of them, but they're getting better, like a lot better now, a lot more. And institutes like the Mind and Life Institute is really helping with that. A lot of scientists now are really clued in. Oh my gosh, there are a lot of functions to all these things we didn't understand. That's good science. Like noticing what we haven't really engaged, thought about, or understood yet, noticing what we haven't even asked about yet, and kind of beginning to ask about it. And even inviting in further aspects of traditions to see what it could mean for our time. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Is that okay? Yes, Ruby.
That last question kind of segues really well into what I was going to ask. And I think you sort of rhetorically asked that question too. And I've felt it for sure, but I would love to hear you talk about the richness or the contributions or I don't want to use the word functionality, but a better one doesn't come to mind right now, of devotion in the practice of one's own and in Buddhism in general.
Well, I think to some degree, I try to do things in a way that can be as accessible as possible, accessible. And in trying to do that, there's a kind of, it can become a little bit deceptive in the sense that I have actually all week been talking about devotion and its power and what it can do and what it means from the first minute of the first session of this week. I said, that I went through all these studies and trainings, and I was working on a PhD thesis about Buddhahood and its qualities and powers. And I was also practicing as a Buddhist, and I was studying it with teachers, with their help, reading texts together about many qualities and capacities and powers of Buddhahood, bodhisattvas. And eventually it dawned on me what I was studying was communicating. This is in Mahayana Sutras, commentaries, especially Maitreya texts and many Yogacara commentaries, that we and our whole world, all beings, are held from the ground of our being in absolute unconditional love, compassion, and wisdom from long before it ever occurred to us that that was happening by all those who have awakened before us. And that's what devotion communicates. That's the framework of devotion. Devotion means a kind of frame of understanding and practice that empowers deepening receptivity to qualities of awakening. At first, we have to recognize we're already held in them by all those who have realized them. Now, after I had realized that this is the case, this is what my studies were showing. And not just that, there were some of these teachers I was studying with who were remarkable people. I mentioned Geshe Thupten Tsering. He was one of my main teachers at the Tibetan Institute in Sarnath. And I mentioned that my wife Barbara had described him as simply the kindest, gentlest person she had ever met in her life. And he was considered one of the most brilliant scholars at that institute of brilliant scholars. And he was the most popular teacher they'd ever had. Students were packed into his little hovel, and it was a hovel, all day into the night. And he had Parkinson's disease, teaching us all. It was dawning on me that I was studying qualities of enlightenment with him, not only in the texts. He was it. And when someone has awakened their capacity in that profound a way, they are holding us. That's why hundreds of us were pouring into his hovel. It was just a little shack they lived in Geshe. So devotion is a kind of a frame of mind and practice that allows us to acknowledge that we are held by great powers of goodness and awakening, to acknowledge it rather than ignore it. And to practice in a way that is making us more and more and more profoundly receptive to those qualities which emerge from our deep nature, corresponding to theirs, quickened, empowered by them, by their actualized nature. Like two tuning forks. You strike one tuning fork, and another one over here just starts resonating. So someone who's actualized their deep nature, their Buddha nature, it's resonating with us. It already is. We just haven't noticed. That's what the texts I was studying were communicating. If anyone has the eyes to see it. And in a sense, how can we deny what I'm saying? This is the structure of devotion in a Buddhist sense. Mahayana, Vajrayana. It's also Theravadan. The Buddha is not just a guy who became very knowledgeable. He's a power. Yeah. So anyhow, go back, if you go back and listen to the tapes through this kind of lens, audio lens or something, you'll hear it. The whole week has been about devotion and its power and what it is. Deepening receptivity to qualities of awakening. And then our response to that, that's awakening our capacity, our Buddha nature. And then from there we respond. And eventually where it leads is, it has to lead eventually to bodhicitta. That is, I can't be satisfied with just being the recipient of this. I have to participate in this. That's more who I really am. I have to join them. I have to become part of that field of care, that field of refuge. That's why the refuge, 2 lines of refuge. I go for refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Sangha. By the power of bodhicitta and all 6 perfections, may I fully realize Buddhahood for the sake of all. That's why the commitment of bodhicitta falls immediately from refuge. Because if we really get refuge, which is a deeply devotional frame of practice, deep receptivity to the power of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and how it's awakening us, then we have to generate bodhicitta. I have to join you. I have to join that refuge field. I have to become a part of it, an extension of it. I have to, because it's showing me who I am. And it's showing me who everybody else is and how much they've gone through, how much they've all gone through, and how deeply connected we are. Like all parents of ours, like that. So that's kind of my response. Seems to be acceptable.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to tell you that I did it like 1 or 2 times during the days, now the last few days, and it already works, like already, but just doing it a few times.
This inclusive mode or the field of care practice.
Yeah. And including my also bad habits and giving them a space to heal. Really worked good for me, and I want to thank you for that. This week was amazing. I didn't think this will be so profound and special. I just want to comment or give you a feedback. Thank you very much, really. It really helps already. So it's working. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver.
Keeping on the gratitude train, I wanted to thank you for providing a structure of practice. What I've really felt throughout the last 5 days, my normal mode is figuring it out, which is good for all sorts of things. But what I've really learned and what I really had the felt experience was then to purposefully shift to letting it in.
Yeah.
Right. And letting it in is a lot less tense. And to have that as an option, in my life is really important. So I wanted to say thank you. And then I also wanted to know
Us first on that point.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you use the phrase that you're used to figuring things out. I think you've done well with that. So that's also a good skill to have. But here in this style of practice, we're letting the power of the practice figure us out. And please keep that phrasing in mind. You're used to figuring things out, but here it's a real learning to let the power of the practice figure us out. And then from there, that implies more discernment can come. As we get figured out by the power of the practice, we get moments of clarity, moments of seeing more, discerning more, and also creative expressions. Ironically, creativity emerges, which can then feed into times when I do need to figure things out. But this is figuring us out. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I really had that direct experience a few times of being meditated
Right.
by the people in this room and the space in the room.
Yeah.
Well,
you're being meditated by, to some degree, by the nature of your mind. But the people in this room may be really helping with that by doing the same, because we're resonating with each other, heart to heart. I can help each other. Just like our teachers are, from their depth, are resonating with our depth. As we're learning to settle into our depth, all of us together, we're resonating with each other and helping to empower each other. But please go on.
The second layer of gratitude, the second scale of gratitude is how important it is to bring devotion back into the picture. I'm somebody who really benefited from people creating a bridge between science and engineering and practice, which the decision was made was, oh, devotional works against that. Probably true. But now there's this real question of like, we need devotion, and devotion is something that can be understood, albeit with less linear methods than we're used to. So the second layer of
Dollars, is that
gratitude,
right?
the work I'm doing now is primarily about,
Yeah, there
in the
was a
same way that people used science to make practice safe for me, is I'm in a position where I can help make devotion safe for the people who have sort of gotten their feet on the ground with the secular mindfulness. And so this work will directly support that. So thank you.
Yeah, Bill, I think you'll enjoy reading my new book with Paul Condon. It's called How Compassion Works. I wish it had come out by now because there's so many times this has come up here now. It needs to be here, but it'll be out in a few months from Shambhala and How Compassion Works. And you'll want to go through that. We can come in conversation about it if you like. Also, Paul Condon.
Yeah, I would love that.
There's one here. This will be our last.
Thank you so much. First of all, this is my first session. I couldn't make it to the former ones.
Yeah.
So maybe my question was already addressed in one of the earlier sessions. But I wanted to know, in this approach, how would you advise one to, like, what should one do when during the meditation, like feelings of like anger and kind of woundedness come up, and which kind of I was interested in asking your explanation also in relation to the, what is it, confirming and confronting framework that you addressed, because I feel like the anger was directed towards someone.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
The whole session of our whole second session was dedicated to your question. So that, listen to that, watch that videotape. You should register for this course so you have access to the videotapes and then watch that. But the basic idea is that the practice of bringing to mind a field of care and re-inhabiting it as happening now helps make us into a very loving, healing environment for all of our reactions and feelings. So we notice those feelings and reactions as they come up, and we let them be included in this loving, healing environment. And that changes our relation to those reactions. In the case of anger you raised, it radically changes our relationship to that angry sense of self and its reactions, totally. That's something you need to explore with the video and do the meditation with it. Because right now you're mostly in your head. So your reactions to what I'm saying are mostly coming from your head, not yet from experience. Secondly, what was the second part? Yeah, mostly just that. It has to do with how the field of care helps us become a really different kind of environment for all of our feelings and reactions. And in that way, in a very natural way, without even trying to, we're no longer identified with them, not by trying to not be identified. Anger can only function as long as we're identified with the anger. But by becoming a healing environment for the anger, we are no longer the anger. We're a healing environment. So the anger cannot function. It's just like the cab driver and the enraged man. It can no longer function, not because we're trying to disable it, not because we're trying to get it not to function. We're not trying to do anything to it. It's precisely because we're not trying to do anything to it, but just being a loving, healing environment for it, that it can no longer function, because we're not feeding it. We're not identified with it. And so all it can do is settle and metabolize itself in its own time. That's all it can do. And that's the direction of our learning. And that's real. So please take that into your, not just your head, but your heart, and register if you're not, so you can get the videotapes. And really, you asked to see that second session. You probably would want to see the first session too. and then really follow that second session, meditate with it, and consider what I'm saying now. That is actually a totally direct answer right to your question, that second session. Okay? You're welcome. Okay, we have to stop there. So I really want to actually thank all of you and all those who showed up. It really helps it helps my learning to hear from many of you. And also, as I said, it's kind of empowering for all of us as we show up and we sincerely enter into some level of practice together. We're all kind of resonating with each other and helping each other along, just like Bill said in the back. So thank you so much for showing up, everyone who did all week, and also those online. And I'll keep you all in my prayers, okay? Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Well, we would like to also to thank you from the heart and from the
Welcome.
heart,
Safe travels.
our personal heart. I can speak for all of us online too, our personal heart, but also from the heart of the tradition, which you really give us access to. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Thanks for all your support all week and for all of this and for all of us. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jan.